After 5 years, the current era of Doctor Who is now coming to an end, with Chris Chibnall and Jodie Whittaker set to leave the programme later this year. Having recently rewatched all the revised series over the last year, I thought I'd do something special and pay tribute to the most recent seasons and look back on its best moments. In this series, I'll be covering each of the 3 seasons of the 13th Doctor's era and picking out some of the best moments of each and every story so that we can reminisce together about the scenes that we've enjoyed over the last few years, and maybe add a different perspective to some of the bits that you didn't think much about before. Going in, of course, I would like to point out that I don't think the Chibnall era has been perfect, or even one of the highest points in the show's history. Heck, I'll even be going into episodes that I didn't like that much at all. But I have enjoyed it on the whole. My main impetus for doing this is because I think it gets way too much hate for what it is. If you're not a fan of this era, that's fine, but the fact is the show gets so much of a beating from certain corners of the fanbase that the general impression from the wider public seems to be that the show is now unwatchable, or has killed a 60 years legacy, or that Chris Chibnall and Jodie Whittaker hate the fans, which absolutely isn't the case. In fact, the majority of it has actually been alright. So I decided, as I was making my way through Who's most recent chapter during my rewatch, that I would list out my favourite moments from each episode, as well as my favourite moments from Whittaker's incarnation of our favourite Time Lord, to hopefully spread a bit of positivity about this era and prove that it wasn't all that bad. Starting with the 11th series of the Revival. I think it's only fair to talk about the Doctor and Jodie's first crack at the role first. I forgot just how good she was in this opener. She really establishes herself well within the first hour on screen. From her innocent childishness, to her chattiness, to her immediately jumping onto a case, and forgetting all about the fact that she's still stranded without a TARDIS and still fizzling with regeneration energy. All leading to that third act declaration of, I'm the Doctor, sorting out fair play throughout the universe. But I think the scene that stands out most with 13 in her opener is the scene where she's building her new sonic Swiss Army knife screwdriver from Sheffield Steel. Not only does it show off her resourcefulness, being able to construct gadgetry and absolutely having a blast doing it, full of chaotic energy and smashing bits up, but the chat she has with Grace and Graham is really well written and performed. We've heard all about how regeneration is like dying, and how everything I am dies, and some new man goes sauntering away, and how the last 3 Doctors didn't want to go, which is a fascinating concept, but ends up bogging the whole thing down in angst instead of celebrating the great thing about regeneration. It's not an end, but a new beginning. There's this moment when you're sure you're about to die, and then you're born. It's terrifying. Right now, I'm a stranger to myself. There's echoes of who I was, and a sort of call towards who I am, and I have to hold my nerve and trust all these new instincts, shape myself towards them. I'll be fine, in the end. Hopefully. It's a lovely alternative perspective on regeneration, and how it must feel for the newest incarnation. It's like learning how to walk again. It's terrifying, and it's an early showcase of 13's insecurities at incarnation. But it's also a brand new adventure for her, and that is bloody exciting. But more than anything, she knows she has to do it, because you guys need help. And if there's one thing I'm certain of, when people need help, I never refuse. Even when frightened and unsure of herself, not even knowing who she is the Doctor. This is going to be a tough one to talk about, because due to the complete overhaul the show has had between the Moffat and Chibnall eras, there's a lot of different approaches I could take to what the best part of the first episode of the era is. Do I talk about the more cinematic look? Sagan Akinola's entirely different and supremely underrated score? The establishment of the fam as both a unit and individual characters? Including Grace, who is the highlight of the cast and I was genuinely sad to see die at the end? The way the cast are brought together to look after each other at their lowest moments? The change from setting up big season-long arcs to mostly standalone stories that speak for themselves? Tim Shaw as a completely despicable and semi-recurring villain? Or do I even go on a 10-minute rant about how Ryan is the first dyspraxic character in popular fiction to actually have it confirmed and not just be headcanoned as such because the actor had it, or he's just a clumsy comedic character, and even if it kind of gets forgotten about later, it's still precisely one more character that gets to represent the dyspraxic community? I've actually gone for the really shallow option and decided to go for a funny moment. I just really like the bit where the drunk guy's flinging bits of his kebab at the monster, okay? It's a very silly and very honest reaction to how the average British citizen would react to an alien, only to be followed by a brutal death. It's very much a scene that you'd find in the Russell T Davies era, or most definitely in Torchwood, who Chibnall show ran for the first half, so I guess that's my bias showing through there. On my rewatch of The Ghost Monument, I realised I'd forgotten how enjoyable it actually was. And not only that, but also how good Jodie was in it. She consistently spent the first half of the story making me laugh. But I think it's not exactly a competition which moment in this episode wins out. The final scene where she's reunited with the TARDIS is wonderful. I almost teared up at her desperation as she called her back. You get the sense that 13 treats her TARDIS with just as much love as an actual person. The look on her face is more than just excitement, it's the face that you make when you're reunited with a loved one. And her smile only grows when she realises that her newfound family are in for a treat. As for the interior design, I can take it or leave it, but I will not hear a bad word about the custard cream dispenser. Not one. No, sir. Now, I kind of backed myself into a corner here as to what to put as the best episode moment, since I've kind of already done it. But I'm determined to get 2 talking points per episode in here, so let's see what else we got. I was tempted to talk about the theme of trust in this episode, with the fam having to learn to trust the Doctor, Ryan having to learn to trust Graham, Angstrong and Epso having to learn to trust our heroes and in each other, in spite of their inabilities to let people in. That particular talking point gets an honourable mention here, because I was just distracted the whole time by how gorgeous the episode looks. I'm not the sort of person who gets hung up on production values and how a piece of media looks. I mean, I'm a Doctor Who fan for crying out loud, but Desolation, ironically, looks beautiful. I've recently found myself a bit tired of desert planets thanks to recent Star Wars materials and the Dune hype, but I would be more than happy to be stuck on a boat in this wasteland with undrinkable water and 3 suns until I am inevitably snuffed out. Big shout out to Mark Tonderai's direction here. If there's one thing that's been consistently great about the 13th Doctor as a character, it's how she deals with one-on-one confrontations with baddies. We saw this a bit with Tim Shaw and Ilan in the last 2 episodes, but it's with Krasko where she absolutely lets loose. The initial confrontation on top of the tankers is a great moment, reminiscent of a western, but it's the second meeting in the warehouse that lives rent-free in my head. These are some serious 7th Doctor shenanigans going on here, from throwing Krasko's equipment in the way of his time displacer weapon, the verbal dressing down and the deduction that BBC Sherlock would be proud of, and most of all, how she provokes him into attacking her. But he can't do anything. This guy has his hands on her throat, and she is laughing in his face. Jodie Whittaker has all of the status in this scene and is refusing to give Josh Bowman a single crumb of it. I also find it most interesting how 13 tends to do this when separated from her fam. It does a lot to reinforce the idea that she puts up a front while she's with them, that she's the smiley, kooky leader of the so-called flat team structure, which hides not only her insecurity and dependence on her friends, but also just how powerful an entity she is. She can't function alone, but you don't want to be left in a room with her by herself. Like with the Ghost Monument, there is a very obvious candidate for the best episode moment. The climax, where Rosa is arrested on the bus as history dictates, while our heroes realise the full gravity of their actions. Having put history back on track, it has resulted in an innocent woman's incarceration, by their hands. While that scene is a very emotional cap to the story, I'm actually looking to the start of the episode for the standout scene. A lot has been said about Rosa, and to be honest, I'm not sure if there's a consensus on it. I've heard some people call it a series highlight, some have said it's a well-meaning misfire, and Some people have said it's territory the show probably should have left alone. I'm personally a big fan of it, but it's not exactly a fun watch. But no matter what, I have to appreciate the sheer ballsiness of it. Within the first 5 minutes, Ryan is attacked in the street and screamed at for trying to help someone, purely based on the colour of his skin. And that's what's normal for 1950s America. It's a moment that makes you jump right out of your seat in shock. It's an effective tone setter, to say the least. Right out of the gate, the episode grabs you by the collar and tells you, yes, we're doing a Rosa Parks episode. Brace yourself, because this is going to get heavy. The episode doesn't stop hammering home the institutionalised racism of the Montgomery setting throughout the story, to the point where it's very much not what one expects on Sunday tea time on BBC One. But that initial setup sticks in my head like a sudden slap to the face. In the previous episode, I mentioned the Doctor's dependency on her companions. Here's where we get to see that insecurity rise to the surface for the first time. The opening scene sees her drop her new friends off home after 2 weeks of struggling to get them there. But knowing the Doctor, no matter how long someone's been travelling with them, it's never just one trip for them. But when you drop them back home for the first time, there lies the big question of whether they want to do it again. We've had similar situations with the 10th Doctor, with Martha and Donna, where he talks about how much fun they've had in order to convince them to stay. But 13 doesn't quite have the confidence to play that card. She clearly wants to ask them to come with her, but she doesn't want to force them to come with her. I really like the way she shrinks a bit and tries to unconvincingly act like she knows what she's going to do after they've gone. And as soon as Yaz gives her the invitation to come over for tea, she is on it faster than a Raston warrior robot. This chick ain't fooling anyone. It's both a really funny moment and also a really cool character beat for her. We've seen Doctors being codependent on the companions before, notable mention to The Power of Three, also penned by Chibnall. But this is a whole nother level, and it's an interesting character choice for this Doctor. One thing on my series alone rewatch that stuck out to me so far is how the fan worked better than I remembered. We talk a lot about how the TARDIS is a bit crowded now with all of them in there, but I think they all get a chance to shine. And by the end of this episode, it really does feel like a family unit. Or at least it does to me. One thing that really works is their individual motives for travelling with the Doctor. Grace's death is weighing heavily on Ryan, and especially on Graham. Ryan's blood relatives are either dead or previously absent and trying to barge back in after a tragedy. And Yaz is feeling listless with her career as a probationary officer, and overwhelmed by her overbearing family. So, at the end of the story, after doing some thinking at home, all three of them mutually agreed that adventures in time and space are probably a really good shout right now. This final scene also acts as a lovely follow-up to the Jodie moment I mentioned before. As much as she wants them to be on board, she's now asking them to be absolutely sure before agreeing. Which, given the week that she had before meeting them, can you blame her? But as soon as they give their consent, she is jumping up and down like a kid in a sweet shop. It's a lovely scene, especially with her inviting Team TARDIS to pull the lever with her. To coin a phrase,
I love this bit.
Probably the most notable change for a lot of fans between the Moffat era and Chibnall's is the feel of the dialogue. I think this was always likely to be the case no matter who took over as showrunner. It's less to do with the way that Chibnall writes his dialogue and more how Moffat wrote his. The show under his watch became famous for its big dramatic speeches. Stonehenge, Colonel Runaway, The Long Way Around, An Idiot with a Box and a Screwdriver, The First Second of Eternity, Just Kind. And that's just scratching the surface. It's something he's insanely good at, and it was always going to be missed. But the Saranga Conundrum does give us a great little speech with the 13th Doctor, as she explains and marvels at the antimatter generating engines of the Saranga. It's very different from Moffat's poetic sounding dialogue. In fact, it sounds more like a science lesson than anything else. But you can see the Doctor's passion for the subject. It gives me very similar vibes to the first Doctor's speech about the creation of a new solar system and the edge of destruction. The Doctor has a great admiration for the creatures of this universe, true, but they also have a great love for the universe in general, and its inherent beauty. So, when confronted with a system used by her favourite creatures, using the natural elements of the universe to explore more of said universe, she can't help but smile. An additional shout out to the very Moffat-style answer that the Doctor gives Mabley when she's asked about what kind of Doctor she is. Medicine, science, engineering, candy floss, Lego, philosophy, music, problems, people, hope. Mostly hope. It doesn't just offer itself up. You have to use your imagination. Imagine the best solution and work to make it a reality. Whole worlds pivot on the axe of imagination. It's the best of both worlds with this one. I just really dig the Bating. I just think it's one of the more iconic monsters we've had in recent years. Not the most intimidating, certainly, but you're not going to forget it anytime soon. It looks like if a gremlin and a pug had a baby, just this gross yet slightly cute little monster waddling around the service ducts eating spaceships from the inside out. It's a really unique threat in that it doesn't attack other life forms, but still ends up causing havoc and destruction by going directly for the ships. It's not hostile, it's just hungry, and very difficult to get rid of. The fact that there are no plushies of this thing is the biggest crime that Chibnall has ever committed to this franchise, and by God, he will pay! Immediately following on from the massive paragraph about how there are less speeches in the Chibnall era, here's another speech in the Chibnall era. The Doctor's speech on love, as she officiates the wedding of Prem and Umbreen, is one of those lovely little Doctor Who moments that you expect to get shared around social media like inspirational posts. You know, like we're all stories in the end, or life is a pile of good things and bad things. It's really well delivered by Whittaker.
I know there aren't many certainties in any of our lives. But Umbreen, Prem, what I see in you is the certainty you have in each other. Something I believe in my faith. Love, in all its forms, is the most powerful weapon we have. Because love is a form of hope, and like hope, love abides in the face of everything. You both found love with each other. You believed in it, you fought for it, and you waited for it. And now, you're committing to it. Which makes you, right now, the two strongest people on this planet. Maybe in this universe.
But it also hit me really hard on this viewing, while musing on the themes of radicalisation and extremism, and how it always seems to aim at destroying the lives of people like Prem and Umbreen, who just want to live in peace and love each other. The Doctor's core philosophy is how important love is as a concept, that it binds us all together, and it makes us stronger than we are alone. Even when Prem is taken from Umbreen at the end, she still manages to live a long life filled with the love of those around her. She doesn't allow her hatred to overcome her. Meanwhile, Manish has spent the entire story stewing in his hatred. And where does that get him by the end? Well, we don't see how his turns out in the long run, but I like to think it's very easy to infer based on the ending. Alone and angry. One other neat thing that you can also note about this speech is that it's a direct result of the 12th Doctor's advice to his successor before regenerating. Remember that hate is always foolish and love is always wise. And it's certainly good to see 13 living up to his example, even if there wasn't any doubt she would. So, I've already briefly mentioned the ending, and now it's time to go into more detail. It kills me. As mentioned, Demons of the Punjab is very much a story of two clashing ideologies. Love versus hate. The story is entirely focused on something as simple as a wedding between two people who have known each other for their entire lives. And our main villain is opposed to it entirely on political and nationalistic grounds, despite his personal connections to the otherwise happy couple. Manish wants to rail against the system after the fallout of the war, to be part of what he thinks is a greater cause because he never got the chance to prove himself like his brothers did. But in doing so, he turns his back on everyone in his life who's ever shown him kindness. This is perfectly exemplified in the scene where Umbrian gives a speech about how hard he has worked for the family, and how proud she is to call him a brother. And he rejects her outright. Despite knowing her for all of his life, she's not one of his people, and therefore, the enemy. All of this comes to a head when Manish's gang of Hindu nationalists show up on the farm, and Prem tries one last time to talk him down. But Manish doesn't budge. He's too far gone, and doesn't recognise Prem as his brother, much less a friend. As the Fajarians appear to watch over the proceedings, Prem's fate is sealed. Neither the audience or our TARDIS team see as Prem is shot by one of his once allies in the war, no less. But the Fajarians do, as they honour him and the thousands of others pointlessly killed in this tragedy that history has sadly refused to acknowledge. It's a harrowing ending, and definitely the emotional highlight of the series so far. It's been a while since I've seen Kablam, and I forgot how enjoyable it actually was. I mean, obviously it's got that ending, which by the nature of this marathon I am not going to acknowledge, but for quite a lot of it, it's firing on all cylinders. Jodie, of course, is of no exception. There's quite a lot of her being confrontational towards the various baddies of the story, which she excels at, but the moment that really stuck out to me on this rewatch is the moment when Judy tells the new recruits not to climb on the conveyors, and her jaw just drops in disbelief. I forgot about this reaction and initially burst out laughing when she did it. The childishness of 13 is something I absolutely love about her character. It just adds an extra level of fun to this Doctor, which is just a really nice contrast to her predecessor. Going from the Doctor being told not to go on the conveyors, the best moment of this episode for me is Ryan going on the conveyors. Oh, I bet she was proper gel when she found out. I know it's probably a weird pick, but this is the first thing that always pops into my head when I think of Kablam. It's a goofy scene of characters on a rubbish green screen effect rolling around and shouting at each other, and it's just... if this isn't Doctor Who, then I don't know what is. It's just jolly good fun is what it is. I think it's also a fun character beat for Ryan to drag Yaz and Charlie into the most dangerous way of getting to where they need to be, and Yaz just going, okay. The fan dynamic really did come together a lot better than I remembered it did. At the time of writing, The Witchfinders contains my favourite 13th Doctor moment. Now, you might be thinking the obvious candidate would be the scene where she confronts King James I while in captivity, and they discuss the way they hide behind their respective masks in order to justify the way that they see the universe. Now granted, it is a great scene, but it's not the scene I'm thinking of here. Looking back at the previous historical episodes in Series 11, there's been one consistent rule from the Doctor. Do not get involved in historical events. This has been especially emphasised since these stories have involved some unjust tragedy that the Doctor has had to let happen. The arrest of Rosa Parks, the death of Prem, and the displacement of his family from their home. Because these are moments in time where it is just that important. While it has led to an analysis by some of the 13th Doctor being very much an authority on what can and can't be done during her friend's adventures in time and space, or to put it more simply, a cop like the rest of the Time Lords who want to preserve the status quo, I found that she doesn't appear to take any pleasure in doing this. The look on her face when Rosa is arrested is some Time Lord fury if I ever saw any. So here we are, in the 17th century, about to watch a witch trial. One of the most embarrassing periods in history where people were needlessly murdered in order to prove their innocence from an imaginary crime. and the Doctor once again tells her friends those same 3 words. Do not interfere. But almost immediately as soon as she gets to that lake, she falters. The whole time she has her eyes locked on the travesty before her. She sat by while Rosa was arrested. She walked away while Prem was murdered. She will not stand by while more innocent lives are ruined if she can help it. She is the Doctor. At the first sign of trouble, she does what she always does best and dives into that lake and puts herself at risk to try and help somebody in need. And while she doesn't succeed to save old Mother Twiston, this is only the first step in stopping anyone else from suffering pointlessly at the hands of one person who believes himself better than all the rest by being cruel and cowardly. Everything that she stands against. Speaking of which... The Witchfinder's main theme is that of bullying. When you get right down to the bare essentials of the witch trials, and any other form of prejudice for that matter, it's all about one set of people contriving a way to feel superior over another. And especially in cases where the former has plenty of insecurities about how imperfect they actually are. That's by bringing the latter down. The story has 2 bullies at its core, King James I and Becca Savage, both with plenty of insecurities and traumas. James living his life with a target on his back, particularly from those close to him, and Becca's worries that her reputation and indeed her life would be at risk should anyone find out that she unleashed the Morax, or that she believes Satan. The story takes different approaches to how these 2 come to term with their insecurities and how they will deal with it going forward. James has the aforementioned scene with the Doctor, which shakes him to his core. All of this comes to a head in the scene where the Doctor herself is ducked.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Here, Becca realises that she's discovered, and as she's literally leaking the secrets out of her body, she doubles down. And more frantically, she demands the Doctor's death, and her little friends too. She will kill as many people as she has to, so long as her secrets remain safe. Even the women who try to help her. And even if it's literally tearing her apart from the inside. Meanwhile, James falters, realising that the Doctor doesn't have to die, doesn't need to die. It takes him some persuading from the fam, but you can see him trying to will himself to step in and say no more to the madness that he started. James orders the Doctor to be spared, and now he sees the true evil here. The Witchfinders is primarily remembered for its very lacklustre villains in the 3rd act, but like with Kablam, it shocked me just how well put together the first 2 thirds are. Seriously, Series 11? Kinda slaps. Frog on a chair, next. Okay, let's actually break this thing down. Series 11 had a lot of really dumb criticisms thrown at it. But the one non-bigoted bit of criticism that I took serious umbrage with was when people said that the scene with the Doctor confronting the Solitract, who appears as a frog on a chair with the voice of Grace, was a really dumb-looking scene. Guys, do you know what show you are watching? Have you ever seen a Dalek? Doctor Who is a silly, silly show. This is a positively normal Sunday evening for the Doctor. But in terms of the scene itself, yeah, it's great. I'm counting the moment just before this where the Doctor convinces the Solitract to let Eric go as well. Eric is too consumed by his grief over Trina to budge, so the Doctor has no choice but to barter with the sentient universe and offer herself and her literal galaxy brain in place of this idiot human whose daughter needs him. It's a brilliantly doctorly solution where her brilliance saves the day, not through the actual use of it, but the mere threat of it is enough to terrify or entice an opponent. When it's just her and the Solitract left alone, the feeling of the setting changes. Previously, it was this feeling that you were being lured into something that you wanted, but now the mask is off, and the Solitract can reveal itself in its truest form. A small, simple creature who just wants the company, who chose the form of a frog because it liked being Grace. and Grace loved frogs. Jodie's surprise and wonder at this creature's benevolence is great, particularly her speech about how it's the maddest, most beautiful thing she's ever seen. She's just brought down to her knees in awe, and that leads very naturally into her trying to convince the Solitrack to let her and the universe go. For if they were to stay together, it wouldn't go well for either of them. It appears to be begging at first, but what she's actually doing is bringing herself down to its level, to talk face to face as equals. It's a truly iconic Doctor Who moment, and I will throw hands with anyone who says that it's done. So, I've obviously talked about the biggest scene in this episode already, but unlike the Ghost Monument, the best episode moment I'm picking here isn't a second place scene. This time, it only just beat the scene with the frog. And that's the scene just before, where Graham has to choose to give up Grace. Bradley Walsh's performance in this one is heartbreaking. Graham knows what he needs to do, but he just can't bring himself to do it. He knows he needs to help Ryan, but he can't give up this second chance with his lost love, and the Doctor isn't enough to convince him. But it's when quote-unquote Grace tells him that Ryan can look after himself is where it clicks for him, and the illusion immediately shatters. Walsh's simple delivery of "so close" is like a punch in the gut. He doesn't even look at her for the rest of the scene. Bradley has been a consistent favourite of this era, and it's obvious why. Not to throw shade on the actual finale, but It Takes You Away is a great thematic finale to the series, to the point where I think it would have worked better if it was the actual ending. This series has primarily been about Ryan and Graham working to push through the grief of losing Grace, and ultimately becoming closer for it. And Ryan's finally calling Graham Grandad by the end does feel earned after everything they've gone through. Back in the Sarang conundrum, I compared the speech that Whittaker gives about the antimatter drives to Hartnell's speech in The Edge of Destruction about the creation of a new solar system. With the Battle of Ranskorak-Kolos, or as I shall now affectionately abbreviate it to, Borak, we get another speech at the end of the story which puts me in a similar mind to Hartnell's famous "One day I shall come back" speech from the Daleks' invasion of Earth, which Jodie has also recently done a version of. None of us know for sure what's out there. That's why we keep looking. Keep your faith. Travel hopefully. The universe will surprise you. Constantly. It's a short and simple speech, and that's what makes it work. It perfectly captures the Doctor's positive and inquisitive outlook on the universe. She has no idea what's coming next, and all the better for it. It's just one more adventure on the horizon. The thing that I think has been underappreciated about Borak is the invention of the Ux, these two sole followers of an ancient faith with godlike powers who dedicate their lives to passing down the knowledge to the next generation of Ux in preparation for an ancient prophecy to be fulfilled. In Borak, we're introduced to Andinio, the Elder, who has been fully entrenched in this way of life since the beginning, knows no other way of life and has closed her mind to the possibility of doing so. And Delph, the younger Ux, who is struggling to understand why these restrictive traditions are still persisting over these years, when there's an entire universe to explore with so much more to learn about. One might make comparisons with the Doctor's own relationship to the Time Lords here. What especially stands out to me is later on, where we discover that Tim Shaw is posing as the Ux's creator for his own nefarious ends. And Andinio, so wholly devoted to the scripture that it always told her that the creator has a grand plan and that she as a mere mortal cannot possibly comprehend, has wired up Delph to this machine without question to carry out his atrocities for him, using their powers. It's something that powerful men have done for centuries, claiming to know the word of God so well that they will use it as an excuse to carry out their own malicious agendas, duping their religious followers, particularly that of the older generation, that they know what's best, and often ruining the younger generation's chance at enjoying their lives or even making it better. As a semi-religious person myself, it's one of the most frustrating things to look back on. and unfortunately still see it happening this day. Andinia was forced to question her faith in what she's been told by this dictator in order to truly see what she's doing to others, and indeed her student, the only other one of her kind, and come to her senses about what she's doing is wrong. The story isn't necessarily taking down religion, but in blindly following the will of those that you follow. It's been one of Doctor Who's central pillars to question your authority. If your creator wants to create peace and harmony, then why would they ask you to harm others? Just because you cannot understand the divine plan, you should at least try and question it. I think it's fair to say that the truest test of a Doctor's mettle is how well they perform when faced with a Dalek. After all, what is the Doctor without the Daleks? Happy, probably, but certainly not as effective a hero. Given 13's previous experience with confronting her villains one-on-one, even calling out Aaron for his absence on first seeing him in this episode, I think there was no way that I couldn't talk about this scene. The confrontation with the reconnaissance scout Dalek is damn good. It's got some great build-up as well, with Jodie wandering around the warehouse, trying to find the creature, and then there's a familiar whirring sound. And then... But the Doctor's prepared for it. Jodie gets to absolutely dominate this thing, belittling it, walking around it, making snide comments about its new junkyard look, all leading to what every actor in Britain wants to say at least once in their career.
Oh, mate. I'm the Doctor. Ring any bells?
One thing I took note of during this rewatch is the stunt work that Jodie had to do for when the Daleks started shooting at her in this scene. The girl's ducking over for cover, rolling around, doing parkour all over the shop. It's proper exciting. Looked tons of fun to film. I think it definitely cemented this incarnation's place in the series after a lot of misgivings from some fans at the start.
Now, I must remember, how long's a rel?
Man, there is a lot of good stuff going on in this episode. It really is just firing on all cylinders. You've got Len and Mitch's cute little romance, Tosin's performance in the cafe with Ryan's dad, Graham trying to help Aaron reconnect with Ryan, Wayne Yip's direction, Sagan bringing his A-game with the school. But guys, I still got to talk more about the Dalek in this one. I'm not sure if this is a hot take or not, but Resolution was probably the best Dalek story for a decade at that point. While I generally liked the Dalek stories in the Moffat era, I did think that the Daleks dwindled during that time. I put this down to two reasons. One, they mostly appeared in cameos, which did result in them being overexposed while not doing a lot. And two, they didn't do a lot of exterminating in that time. The Daleks were put back at the height of their power, and I think about half a dozen people got killed, and they were all red shirts. It seems that Chibnall has decided to take a similar approach to Russell T Davies and Rob Shearman when reintroducing the Puppet Pots back in 2005. Emphasise just how dangerous a single Dalek is, even when it's not at full strength. The Recon Scout was already a creepy tour de force of a villain when it attached to Lynn's back, which was a really unique idea for a Dalek story 55 years in. But the battle against the soldiers was excellent. Real talk, there's literally no narrative reason for the Dalek to suddenly pick a fight with these random soldiers just hanging around a wind turbine. But gosh darn it, it's flipping awesome! It's a proper popcorn moment, and it's a joy to watch, and it just reminds you how dangerous these things are. It even takes out a tank with a missile stored in its balls. 10 out of 10, would let invade again. I think that Series 11, to this day, is still the most overhated series of this show. While I don't think it's as good as it could have been, and maybe was a bit of a disappointing follow-up to Series 10, which was excellent, I still found it to be a nice palate cleanser after Stephen Moffat's 8-year stint as showrunner. I was enjoying something that felt very different to what we had before, from the dialogue, to the music, to the companions' dynamic, to the fact there were very few recurring elements from the previous series to rely on. Doctor Who felt fresh again for me, and I couldn't be more excited about that. However, on my rewatch, I found myself enjoying it even more than previously. While it didn't feel like an epic season in the same way that Davies or Moffat would write their series, Series 11 focused a lot on the themes of the episodes, and the overall series arc of Ryan rethinking the definition of family ended up being the emotional highlight for me. I think that there's an absolutely solid season of Who here. Give it another try sometime. You might be pleasantly surprised.